Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we might get started. I was just thinking, contemplating as a former children's librarian does, is this the moment where we need to sing Twinkle Twinkle? So, welcome back to this afternoon's session. When we were talking about what would make today really meaningful and really useful for you, so that there would be ideas you could go back and use at Storytime tomorrow in your libraries, we thought it was really important to pick out some examples, and so it was difficult, you can imagine. Emilia has had the opportunity to see so many of the libraries, so many different Storytime sessions, but she's chosen a few different specific things that we thought would be useful tips for you. So I'm going to hand it over to Emilia and our panel. I just discovered actually that the panel members don't know each other, so we'll do some quick intros here. Shows you how big New South Wales is. Susan Forshaw from Sutherland. Liz McCutcheon from Gilgandra. Judy Atkinson from Coffs Harbour. And Lee Castledine from Blacktown.
As Miley said, it was very, very difficult to choose just 4 people. But then, when she designed the program, we noticed we had 40 minutes for this session, and that was the most we could have. And so, it was tough. So before we start, I'd just like to thank again everyone who participated in the project, because as I said, we have learned something from every single session we observed, from every single interview. All right, but I also would like to thank the people who agreed to come and join the panel, because it's not an easy thing. I know that you're facing children and their parents, and you all have a lot of experience with that, but facing your peers as well is sometimes difficult. All right, so without further ado, starting with Susan, we have already heard about the example of the session that you very kindly invited us to observe and allowed us to record and analyze. We've analyzed it in a lot of detail, I have to say. The session about mice, so a preschool storytime session about mice. We found a lot of things very impressive in that session, but we wondered more broadly, what do you see as the key advantages of having a theme-based session? What do these sessions that have an overarching theme offer in terms of children's early language and literacy development specifically?
Thank you. I've got lots of notes here because I thought I'll look out and I won't be able to think of a single thing to say. So I could probably go on all afternoon, so please stop me when you've had enough. At Sutherland, we use a theme-based sessions for all of our Storytime programs. And we feel that for us, and I think that Marie might have touched on this too, that theme-based sessions allow exploration around the topic in more depth and also broadens children's vocabulary. So because you've got books on the same theme and different rhymes on the same theme, you're making connections between ideas that they're getting from each of those resources and the words in the different resources there too. So they're backing each other up and making those connections, and they're helping the children to build up a web of ideas and vocabulary around that theme. So the rhymes are allowing repetition, you're repeating words perhaps over, you're repeating concepts over, and so they're building up a store of knowledge and words about that topic that they can bring into future learning. So we think that's the most important thing for us from a child development point of view. We also find the themes help us in a pragmatic way because we prepare Storytime packs for all 7 libraries, and many of you might have the same experience. So we prepare about 40 packs over a year, so the children's team do that. We might do 1, 2, 3 each, and having a focus helps us to narrow the resources that we're going to use around that theme. So from that point of view, that's quite useful. And also, it does force us sometimes out of our comfort zones. So, we tend to gravitate to the things that we know and love, But this makes us look at, you can't just do cats and dogs every time. You have to look at, as much as you'd like to, you might have to look at feelings or just perhaps slightly more complex topics, which gives you a breadth and a knowledge of what resources are out there too. So that's good for us. And it's good for the kids because they're being exposed to lots of different ideas too. That's how we feel about it anyway.
Thank you so much. And now I've got a question for Liz from Gilgandra. One of the things that impressed us is how well you integrated a non-fiction book almost right at the beginning of the storytime session, which, again, we felt was something brave to do because, again, most of us, even in my own library at home, I have hundreds and hundreds of children's picture books, and I have to say most of them are storybooks. And yeah, I don't know what it is about stories and narrative, but we find them just so engaging, and yet non-fiction books have so much to offer as well. So my question is, why and how do you integrate non-fiction books into storytime?
Thanks, Amelia. We don't use non-fiction at every story time, but we do at a lot of them. And mostly it's because we're wanting to explain or some ideas or concepts or words, new language. So that's the main reason that we do it. We also do it because we know that quite a lot of the children enjoy non-fiction books. There's certain children that they really love non-fiction. My son was a case in point. His favourite book when he was about 4 was about nuclear energy and nuclear power stations, and he kind of had no idea about what it was about, but he loved that book. And there's just certain children that really love non-fiction. So also the non-fiction part of our library is probably a little underutilised, I'd say. So it's introducing that to the children. So we do it for those reasons. And how we do it, we, like everyone, we have the opening song, and then we have If You're Happy and You Know It, which we twist to fit with whatever the theme is. The next thing we do is have a big box that looks like a present, and it's got the story time books in it and the craft. And we present it to the kids, and they open it and give us the books, and we put them on a rack. And the third book that we generally put on the rack is the non-fiction book, and I'll read the title out, and I'll say to them, show them the book and say, what do you know about this subject? And often they'll know quite a bit. and then we go, I put post-it notes on various pages through that link with what we're going to talk about, so the language that's going to come out in the rhymes, like rigging, as you were saying. And we talk about the pictures in the book. We're not really reading it because often the non-fiction books, the language is, it's too long and too complicated. Sometimes we're reading sections of it, but usually it's using the pictures as a way of getting into the story. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And now a question for Judy Atkinson from Coffs Harbour. One of the things that impressed us at Coffs Harbour is what you showed us behind the scenes and the kind of very strong collaborative approach that you adopt with your colleagues towards professional learning, but also towards professional learning about early literacy, early language and literacy, and both developing and reflecting on these sessions. And it may be that similar approaches are happening across libraries, but it is just that you took us behind and showed us what you had on your computers and what you had in the folders. So could you please comment a little bit on what are the benefits of doing it this way, and also maybe describe a little bit about what you do with your colleagues?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. We're fortunate to have a team that presents story time. It's not just one person. The situation is that all our casual staff, part of their job description is that they present children's activities. So we've got a whole range of people recruited for that purpose as part of that. And so we've got the diversity that comes with having a group of people. They're also the people that are on desk most of the other time they're in the building. So they're the ones that are seeing the children come and borrow, and they're the ones that are our storytime champions. So we've got a double-edged benefit there. But to share what we do, because everyone's part-time, we don't have the opportunity to get together very often. So we've developed an intranet page for our storytime connections, And on that page we have a blog that we blog whatever's happening and list the topics that we're going to be talking about. So we'll have a blog coming up now with Summer Reading Club, so we can share that idea. But we've also invite people to participate in training. So we might call on Alia recently had a training for storytelling. American Library Association has online courses that different staff have done at different hours of the morning because they're at different times. We've invited professional storytellers such as Elisa Darlison to come and run a storytime session with our staff. And not everyone can participate. So then what we do is share all those resources, and each person creates a page on the intranet where they share the resources they've obtained for their comment about the training they received and encourage each other to then filter out. So we might have 4 people go to a training session, but 10 people find out about it by how we can share it. A big part of it too is a spreadsheet we keep recording what we do, and so we can reflect and see what we've done. So we don't do lighthouses 2 weeks in a row. We can, see what craft's been done, list what processes we're using for the craft activity. So it might be that we have threading 1 week, crumpling paper another week, cutting another week. So we don't have everything all at once, and people can see the variety because no one else is around when each person's having their turn at story time. We have 3 sessions a week. Someone will do that week, someone will do the next week, and so on. So we can share that with each other and share the training. So we link it all together so that everybody's learning from each other. And then part of it too is because there's so many people involved in Storytime at the library, Storytime's forefront of everything. And those people are the champions that talk about it at staff meetings. We make sure we put in the staff meeting what's happening at Storytime so everybody knows, everybody has to hear it. Everybody then knows what books they should be giving to the children because we're right there, so it's really good. And it makes it a culture of learning. And the other thing is to get all those learning opportunities put into people's personal development plans. Most councils have a scheme of measuring what we do, and if it's not in there, it can't be measured. So get the training in. Encourage people to participate. If they don't want to, that's okay. Just silently pass something on and say, you might want to read this, or this is what we're talking about next week. And so it gives people a chance to learn in their own time and in their own fashion. No one is doing the same thing routinely. It's quite varied. One other thing about that is that we have a very good active public library zone, and we get together as a zone and share what we do, and that's a lot of thanks to Miley for that, who links us all together. And that's an even broader learning opportunity, and that combines everybody's knowledge together. And again, we champion each other's causes. And it's about diversifying what we do. Like we know in the animal kingdom, if you haven't got any diversity, you're not sustainable. So recruit people who've got different skills. Employ someone who can sing, because I can't, and make them a big part of what you're doing, and get the range of skills involved that you need, and then that encourages some people and leads to others. And we often get feedback from the families about what we're doing, and we have feedback forms and that. But don't forget to read the feedback and act on it. Often we record it all; it's all there. But if we don't read it and reflect on it and then use what we've got to make changes or make improvements, then we're not doing the children the best value. So we're lucky we have the support of staff at the library too. We are supported, and we are encouraged to participate in training and learning opportunities. So build on what you've got and diversify. I think that's the key. Yep.
Thank you so much. And it seems that, building that over time as well has helped you gain the support of staff. You've thought very carefully about what these opportunities are, and in terms of also getting recognition from everyone for the important work that's done for early literacy at libraries. All right, and moving on to Lee Castledine from Blacktown. I just practiced her name because I hear different pronunciations. One of the things that impressed us at Blacktown, which was one of the first libraries we went to, the Max Weber, is how many children and grandparents and parents, caregivers attend every baby round time. And they have 6 a week just at the main branch. So could you share with us some of the strategies you employ for working with those very large groups of children and caregivers that attend your sessions? especially baby rhyme time.
Sure. I think I'll demonstrate one of the techniques. Can you hear me up the back? Yeah, okay. So one of the techniques is having good voice projection. So, Miley, can we hand that program out? Strategies, my answer is twofold. So one of the strategies is in the design of the program. So we've developed a monthly program. Each month we change the songs that we do, but I've developed a formula. I don't even need that. I've developed a formula so that the children will know when it starts, what's coming next, when things are going to change, when the stories are going to be read, when they're going to read with their parents or carers, when we're going to get musical instruments, when we're going to dance, when it's going to finish. So they always know what's coming next. And then, we always start with a hello song, and we always do open shut them. After that, I will do probably a counting rhyme, so 5 little ducks. Then we will read stories to them. And then we will do maybe a rhythm, then we'll do maybe a big action song. Then we will, so it's also always chopping and changing and varying the types of songs that you are doing so that you're always engaging them. Do you want me to use that?
We need it for the recording.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And then finishing, then we have shared readings, so we have board books where 20 sets of, or 20 copies of the same board book. We actually use 2 or 3 sets of those at Blacktown because of our large audiences. And that gives us an opportunity to see, do parents know how to help their child to read? Do they know that to give the child the book, that they can turn the pages or they can chew on the pages if they want to? We really don't care, we'll buy more copies. Talking to the parents about, you don't need to read every word. You can talk with your child about what's happening in the story or ask them questions or what colour it is or what sound they might make. Making sure that the parents are engaged when they're reading with their children. Then we always do musical instruments for a couple of songs, so they're always rhythm songs. Then we do a dance. I always dance with children, no matter what program I'm doing, I always dance because it gets those wiggles out. And then using a couple more rhythm or counting or small action rhymes, and finishing with Ruby Roo, which is our mascot for Paint Blacktown Red. So we finish with her song and then the goodbye song. So the design of the formula that I've used for all of our 11 monthly programs is one of the ways that I maintain their attention. The other way is in presentation techniques. So eye contact with each and every child in the audience, making sure that when I'm having that eye contact, I'm changing my expression when I'm looking at each and every child. Tone of voice, voice projection, which I don't need today because I've got a microphone, so I've lowered my voice. Facial expressions, smiling at each and every child, and also each and every parent as well. One of the things we have to do, because we have large groups, and the children, or when we give out the musical instruments, they don't want to give it back. So one of the techniques I've used is actually having a bag and allowing and encouraging the child to put the instrument in the bag rather than trying to take it off them. If I give them the chance to put it in the bag rather than me taking it, they won't cry or scream, hopefully. And thanking them and saying, well done, very good, yes, excellent, you are doing very well. Another thing is, because we have a very multicultural community at Blacktown, making sure that the language that I'm using is simple. So when I'm explaining things to parents, making sure that I'm using very general, simple language for them to understand. Another technique which you won't see on our Baby Rhyme Time videos online, because I've started doing it since the recording of those, is actually explaining to the parents about how I'm going to read this book and why I'm going to read it in the way I'm reading it. As an example, I'll say to them, okay, today babies learn from when they first look up and they see their parents' face. They learn from the tone of voice and they learn from their facial expressions. So when I'm going to read this story, I'm going to over-exaggerate my emotions. And that way the children will understand the story. Even if they don't understand the words I'm saying, they'll understand the story from my tone of voice and my facial expressions. And then I'll read Dear Zoo, and he gets to an elephant, he was too big, and a giraffe, he was too tall. And so and then I say to the parents, now when you're reading to your child, I want you to over-exaggerate your emotions, because your children will understand the story and they'll enjoy the story more. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lee. Now back to Susan Forshaw from Sutherland. One of the things, again, that really impressed us was the way that you read picture books. How do you go about selecting suitable picture books for story time, but also preparing to read a book to a group of children? There was just so much work that, whether you're aware of or not, you were actually doing. It's just amazing. You know, the gestures and everything else. We've done a sort of a detailed multimodal analysis of a few sessions, and yours was one of them. So, yeah, how do you go about selecting picture books for your sessions, but also how do you decide how you're going to read that book, what you're going to emphasize, and so on?
Oh, thank you. I'm very impressed with all the work that you've done on it. I guess I said before that we use packs. So a pack will come that I may not have prepared, which will have stories and rhymes and props related to a particular theme. And that's the case with all of the branch libraries too, and all of the other stuff that do story times. So when the pack comes, it's got enough probably for 3 story times. So there's plenty of choice, and that's really very important. So when I go looking through the pack to see what's in there, and I'll do this not half an hour before story time, but the day before. I work part-time, so probably the week before actually. I have a look, and I'm looking for a balance of stories. I'm looking for things that might be quieter or more reflective. I'm looking for things that are more upbeat. So you've got a whole variety. I'm looking for something that's shorter and for longer stories, because you never know who's going to turn up, do you? You don't know whether you're going to have half a dozen kids sitting quietly, or whether it's one of those story times when you've got 45 and everyone's hanging from the ceiling. So it's important to have a whole lot of different options there. I'm looking for things that might have flaps or various sounds or pop-ups or whatever. And a repeating refrain is always fantastic, isn't it? So that the children can actually read that with you. Something like, there's a hole in the road, oh no, and they can all read it out together. So that helps to engage them. I do the longer story, all other things being equal. I do the longer story at the beginning, of course, when they're fresher and are better able to concentrate. But before I go in, I'll read the story through several times. I've been doing this for a long time, so often I'll know the story quite well anyway, so that sort of helps. But if it's something, particularly if it's something that's new that I haven't done before, I'll read it through a lot of times. I'll read it out loud. You know how we all do that, and other staff think that you're completely mad. But it's really important because you get a sense of the rhythm of the language. So are there any refrains? Are there speech bubbles that I can read out so that they can actually be reading that part with me? Any words that I may not know how to pronounce, any words I may not know the meaning of, or that the children may not know the meaning of. Should I tell them about what that means before we start, or should I just say that means blah blah as the story goes along, if it's not going to be too distracting? If it's a rhyming story, I'm wondering, will the children be able to guess the rhymes? Is it really simple? If I say, there's clues here, listen to this word, and if I emphasise this word, cat, we'll know when we get to the end of the next line, and going by the pictures, we can see that it's sitting on the mat. That's right. How clever are you? Maybe look for little things that are hiding in the pictures. Those little tiny touchy-feely books. That's not my puppy, that's not my everything you can buy now, can't you? I think in everyone there's a little mouse in the picture, so you can draw their attention to that. What's the little mouse doing? So you're extending the story in that way too. Or I went walking, what did you see? That one? I think Julie Vivas did the illustrations, and there's some animal, or there's a clue about the animal that's about to come, or a cat hiding in the basket. Can you see that? What do you think it is? So it helps to engage the children. Probably most importantly, if there are stories that you love, the children will feel it. If you make a connection, they will know too, and your enthusiasm will be contagious, and they will grow to love books. I've got more, but that's probably enough.
Thank you so much. I love the example of I went walking as well as the little mouse example, partly because, particularly with younger children, even just helping them see that this is actually the same mouse on every page. This is the same boy meeting all those animals, and I went walking. This is some important learning of conventions that we've learned long ago and we've forgotten about. Knowing that this ship that looks very small because it's shown in the distance is the same as the one that you see 2 pages later in Curious George, but you see it from a close-up, and it's not a different ship. So, all right. Thank you so much, Susan. Now, back to Liz. We've talked about theme-based story times, but they are used in different ways. I wondered whether you could sort of outline what you see as the benefits of using themes to develop and present your story time. Are there any benefits that are specific to your particular very small community where, if I remember correctly, there is only one story time a month and it's a mixed stage story time? And also, are there any challenges?
Thanks, Amelia. Yeah, our town has a population, our shire has a population of 4,700, and it's a 1.5 person library pretty much, or nearly 2. So it is a small library, but our story time, we tend to have about 15 to 20 children and their parents and caregivers, and sometimes 27 actually. We sometimes get close to 30. So with the themes, it works well for promoting the story time initially. We send out invitations to the people, mail invitations to the people on our list. If they want email, we'll send it that way. But we like to address it to the child and they get it in the mailbox. And it's got a picture of our main book that we're having. And so the main book that we've chosen is the basis of the theme. So, for example, when Amelia came, it was pirates. And so then that starts us off on thinking about all our rhymes and songs and craft activity, and what we find great about that is it's like we're going into a world of that for that session, and it works well with the craft because generally it's a prop of some sort that they're making. So it could be a puppet, or it could be recently we had a dinosaur one and they made little dinosaur tail things to go down their back, and they all left the library wearing them. So so they go home and they talk about that, or they go out in the street and they talk about it. I've had people at the post office say, your story times, I see the kids coming out, and they go to the park, and it's just lovely. And it's also a lot of fun because when we tend to have the craft fairly early on again in the session, just after the first book, and so when they come back from making the craft, they're also wearing or playing with or bringing whatever they've made. So then the rhymes after that will often fit in with whatever it is. So they're little dinosaurs last week they were little dinosaurs doing the rhymes that were about dinosaurs. So it just works well, and it's a lot of fun. And it helps us to, as you said, look at it again each time with fresh eyes, instead of falling back on what feels comfortable and familiar. We're a little bit challenged each time. So it's lovely for that point of view. Thank you.
Challenges?
Challenges. Well, sometimes finding the right rhymes to fit, but I use Storytime Katie and a lot of the other blogs that are out there to find. And sometimes, of course, if the theme is a little bit... So, for example, we had the pirate one and we used the non-fiction book at the beginning. Well, of course, there were scenes of pirates looting and burning and killing in the non-fiction book. So when I got to that page and in the explanation, I said, yes, well, this is about real... baddies. This is a book about real pirates, and do you know about real and pretend? And they told us what they knew. And I said, well, this is a book about real pirates, and they lived a while ago, and they are actually baddies and robbers, and they understood that. And then we went on to quite a gentle story where the children were connecting with the pirate and feeling emotional towards the pirate and feeling like they were pirates. So we had to make that distinction. But also in the dinosaur one we had last week, we had in the picture the Tyrannosaurus Rex was attacking another dinosaur. So yes, some dinosaurs ate plants and some ate meat, and on we went. So
Thank you. How are we going for time? Do we still have a couple of minutes? Okay. All right. Judy, you will have to be really quick. One of the things that impressed us as well was your strategies for connecting with individual children and families and encouraging a sense of community among the participants in Storytime. Could you please mention some of them and also... Yep.
Thank you. One of the main things we do at Storytime, which I said is group presented, each person has a different turn, is we fashion the craft so that the children have to come up to the presenter to finish off what they're doing. So, for example, when we did the Terrible Plop, the presenter had the little bowl of button-shaped apples, and so each child came up with their plop tree and their bunny rabbit page and came up, and then we attached the apple together. So we tied the string and found a spot and had a conversation. And I find it, we have a mixed age story time, so there's 0s to 5s there. And the older children have developed the confidence to come up and have a conversation and say hello. And the little ones mimic that, and then they develop that ability too. And it's I find it very comforting to see them develop the confidence and develop the language to be able to come up and ask for the button or the cotton wool if we're making clouds, or the string if it's going on something, if we're making a picture with a hanging string on the back or a magnet. And they develop that ability over time, and to see that progress and to see them develop is really worthwhile. They don't always have the confidence, and they sort of hang back with their mum, but that action of having them come up and have a little chat and greet the staff is really good. We also have a volunteer at all our story times, and so whilst the staff member might be different each week, the volunteer is the same. And so some of the children connect with the volunteer, and the sense of community. The volunteer also talks to a lot of the parents and talks to a lot of the families that are there, and she's really great at connecting people to each other. So she might see someone come along who's got a need for a friend or a need for an information, or she'll say, oh, go and see that staff member and they'll be able to get the book for that to help you with that issue you're dealing with, because they confide in her. And so she gets all the inside goss and helps that we can then support people. The other thing is we have a lot of community groups come through library. Every event, every opportunity there is, we might have somebody from the police comes, the lifesavers, or as I'm sure many people do, different council sections, the fire truck, all those things, and that helps build the people an opportunity to approach other parts of the community that they then benefit from. And the care organisations, Anglicare and Red Cross and Burnside Uniting, bring families as well. So we're fortunate to have that connection back through the community.
Thank you so much. One of the other things that we noticed in some library sessions where they had, admittedly, probably enough staff to do it, was that the presenters came and had some time before the session actually started to welcome people, and you did that. And also hanging around after the session while we know you are tired, and in many cases people just have to go on desk. We understand that. If there's any way that you could make that work, even if it's a volunteer who knows a lot about children's books and what the library can offer, that can help with borrowing and also with being that connection. All right, we're extending a little bit over time, but I do want to ask Lee just one question, because what we were really impressed with was your oral storytelling and the way you integrate that into every session. And we wanted to leave that one for last because we thought it might be a little bit intimidating for others, given that you are a professional storyteller. So could you please tell us just very briefly what are the key benefits that you see, and also maybe 3 tips?
Professional storyteller, I will try and keep it brief. So I'll just touch on, but won't expand on too many so that I can tell you. So because as librarians, you're reading stories. Therefore, you're constrained by the words that the author has written. When you're a storyteller, you're learning a story and then telling it in your own words, crafting a story and practicing it until you get it right, but then you can change it each time and adapt it according to your audience's engagement. Things that the children, what they're going to benefit from is expanding their vocabulary, phonological awareness, expanding the vocabulary. An example of that is where I'm telling a story, and one time I might tell it and say, the cat was asleep on the veranda. The next time I might say, the cat was asleep on the deck. The next time I might say, the cat was asleep on the porch. But then the children will understand there's actually 3 different words for the one thing. Understanding the narrative sequence, the different parts of a story, the character, feelings, the plot, time sequences in a story. This is helping with their comprehension skills. So later when they're learning to retell stories themselves, and then later when they're learning to write stories themselves, it's really helps that they've developed that comprehension and understanding of the narrative sequence. Helps with their creative thinking and their imagination, because they haven't got the pictures there that are normally in a book. Although a lot of the stories I tell, I do use feltboard stories, but they will just be a picture of the character. And then the rest of it is for their imagination to think up what the rest of the scene would be. So develops their listening skills. Really important when you're doing early literacy storytelling that you're doing participation. So whether it's actions, whether it's sound effects, whether it's joining in with songs, that you're using lots of audience participation to engage them and keep them concentrating on the story throughout the whole session. It also enhances their social and cultural understanding and awareness. So Blacktown's very multicultural. So when we don't have a multicultural story time that's always in Chinese or always in Arabic. We actually go to a different country each week. So that enhances their understanding of different parts of the world and different cultural traditions and ways that people interact with each other throughout the world. And I always do, when I'm storytelling for multicultural story time or around the world story time, is actually retelling it with crafts. So I always make sure that I've used one of the feltboard stories. I'll use the main character as the craft and then make it into a stick puppet so they can take it home and they can retell the story that I've got them to engage with lots of participation, and then we will actually sometimes quickly go through the story again once they finish their craft so they can go home and then tell it to dad or mum or grandma or grandpa who couldn't come to the library. Was that brief enough?
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I remember when we came to your sessions, and I have to say it's so hard video recording these sessions and not singing behind the camera, joining in with the rhymes. But I remember that story about the tiger who couldn't sing.
Love to sing.
Oh, loved to sing but couldn't sing, right? And yeah, my younger son at the time was 2.5. That was at the beginning of the project, and that was his favorite story for a long time because, yeah, I just took it home. So it's very, very engaging. Thank you all so much for this wonderful panel discussion. I hope that people have enjoyed it, and I hope that while there is many, many more hours that we can spend talking and many, many more stories that we can incorporate into future discussions about what you do at each of your libraries, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we can learn. We are sort of running to a time schedule, so yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. So, how do you put all of this into practice? How do you actually let what we've been talking about change your practice, particularly if you've been doing story time for a really long time? How do you introduce that reflexive element into it? I mean, you probably have many ideas here that you could be thinking about, pondering, perhaps even introducing new things into your organisations. So I'm going to hand it over to the team to share their insights into how to design and evaluate your early literacy sessions using the framework.
All right, so in this final or almost final session from us, we'd like to just briefly introduce the key components of the framework itself, and I'd like to reiterate that while in the project overall we have taken a broader focus on early language and literacy and what public libraries can do to support early language and literacy, and we hope that the presentations from Marie and from Jane have given you an insight into that broader focus and focusing on, say, the way people use space, and also on selecting appropriate picture books and thinking carefully about image-text relationships, taking that sort of multimodal orientation and broad orientation to thinking about early literacy and language at the libraries. In this session, we'll focus specifically on the components of the framework. So I'll just start by, in some ways, just reminding you of some of the things that I introduced. So this is what it looks like, and you've all got a copy. In the introduction, we've explained the relationship between the broader research project and what we, how it has informed what has gone into the framework, which is what I showed previously using a slightly different image. And also why we've decided to focus on early literacy sessions specifically in the framework and the kind of aims that they serve. Part 2 of the actual book that you've got in front of you is actually what we would consider the first important component of the framework, which are the principles for supporting early learning as well as the principles for supporting specifically early language and literacy learning. I introduced those earlier, so I won't go into too much detail, but just reminding you they are engagement, community building, and intentionality. With engagement, we've talked a number of times about the importance of engagement, and I think all of the stories we heard were about engagement, not just during early literacy sessions, but also beyond the sessions, beyond the walls of the library as well. Community building. Again, how do you build a community of readers and library patrons? And I think you would agree that Marie demonstrated that beautifully using examples from what you have shown us, from the way that you manage not just what books are incorporated into story time, what nursery rhymes are sung, but just the way it all comes together, including the organization of space. But also building a community of peers and colleagues. And we have tried to give you tools which would, if you use them, encourage you to actually do that and do it in a way that you write something that shows we did meet together and we did reflect and discuss things together. And for libraries like Gilgandra, where there isn't, I don't know how many staff there are at Gilgandra, there was you and one other person. I don't know how, she's probably part-time. But for those libraries, then maybe going to zone level and organising these meetings would be valuable. Okay, so in terms of intentionality, we talked about having a deliberate age-appropriate focus. We talked about the need for scaffolding, why it is valuable, for example, to repeat a nursery rhyme, not just do it once, so that maybe the children who couldn't join in the first time can join in the second time. Differentiation, different interests, different abilities, different ages, and so on. And here you might want to think about, well, maybe the word squeak is not new to half of the audience, but maybe there are children there who are still learning English, or younger children who might need me to demonstrate what squeak actually sounds like. or what whiskers are, and so on. And reflexive practice is part of that intentionality. So not just in terms of the focus of the session, but also reflecting on it. Okay, the early literacy, the key principles again, the language and literacy learning and the way that they support each other. We have been emphasizing that throughout, and I hope given you enough examples to explain what we mean. That literacy is multimodal, and so we need to think carefully about how can I use gestures to explain something? How can I point to the right places in a picture book to really help children understand those meanings that are most important in that picture book? Of course, picture books are very rich, and there's always going to be something that you find every time, something new. Positive dispositions are important, and the early literacy beginning from birth, even though often people can't see how this could possibly relate to conventional reading and writing, you know, turn-taking activities and so on. But if you take that broader understanding of language and literacy, then I think it's much easier. And the fact that it's the responsibility of many people, and informal educational community settings like libraries have got a lot to contribute. And that idea of thinking about language, and also thinking about, I gave you an example of how library staff actually use language and communication in ways that reflect who they are communicating with during storytime sessions, and in also using these resources in particular ways, they also shape what that context is like, what the relationship is like, how comfortable people feel that they can follow and they can understand. But we can also use that kind of model to think about, in our early literacy sessions, are we providing opportunities for children themselves to use language and experience language as it is used in different kind of contexts? The opportunity of going to get a little bit of your craft materials, get them from the library presenter, from the librarian, that's a different kind of communication than you talking to your mum. And I'll get to an example of that. And so that idea that language is central, not just to literacy, but to learning in general. All right, and these are the literacy domains. So this section, that second section, explains these principles and also introduces very briefly the literacy domains and explains the importance of understanding that decoding-oriented skills and comprehension-oriented skills support each other. Okay? If I don't know a word, it would be harder for me to recognize that word in a stream of speech. So it would be harder for me to recognize those different sound units in speech. So in this way, oral language and vocabulary support my phonological awareness. Oh, sorry, I'm going back instead of forward. So the next section is something that Marie will take us through. Or would you prefer me to go through it? Yeah? Okay. Okay, the next component is the community analysis template that we have developed. Okay, that really gives you some ideas from the things that we have found, mainly in literature coming from library and information services and science research about public libraries. Some ideas for the kinds of things that you might need to consider, and probably a lot of you already are. But we would suggest that not only consider, but also write them down, so that when you have a new staff member coming, you can share that with them. Okay, so what do you need to think about when you think about, okay, well, we know our community really well, but can we sort of articulate that? And you can also then use that, in being, intentional in, for example, I talked about intentionality earlier, and intentionality applies to things like resourcing your early literacy sessions and the library, the children's section and so on, as well as everything else. So when you're looking for funding opportunities, having that kind of analysis can really support you articulate why for my community I need to target this or that funding opportunity and how best to do it. So that that knowledge doesn't just stay in your head, but is there for you to share with colleagues and also to sort of have as a tool to use for, say, resourcing and funding opportunities. So thinking about the location, where is the library, and what is the relevance of the location to children's use of the library. Ease of access, parking, public transport. We're trying to attract hard-to-reach families. But often in a very car-dominated culture, we fail to consider, okay, well, can I have a look at the bus timetable, the train timetable? Because maybe there are some families who would like to come, but, the way that story time starts, it means there will be a long waiting time for them or whatever. So have a look at those things. And also things shift. Are there books around? Are there shops around? And what kind of competition might they present? In Leeton, I believe, people were saying, well, people are happy to go to the shops and the library is right there, but they wouldn't come. Well, that's not unique to Australia. The American literature as well talks about those kinds of challenges. So how can we work together with those businesses to encourage use of the library and connection to the library? Think about population size, the patronage population size, number of users. How many of these users are likely to have children aged birth to 5? Can we get that data? Where can we get these data from? Think about the estimated number of parents with children aged birth to 5 among the patrons. As I said, what are the dominant languages other than English in the community? And which of those, what are the main languages of people who are learning English as an additional language? Because there may be dominant languages, but most of the people speak English quite well or have high proficiency. Okay, so there's a slightly different questions. Think of the key cultures and religious groups, because that might then make some of your storytime themes perhaps not so suitable for some groups that you're hoping to attract. So again, another challenge for storytime themes. Customs, holidays, traditions, socioeconomic and educational status. You can look at the early childhood education and care settings in the area and think about partnership opportunities, because while you might assume that many of them would have, they should have early childhood qualifications, that doesn't mean that they know what resources the library has to offer and how the library can work with them. Okay? Primary schools in the community, library facilities for children and their families. So is there a cafe? Is there a playground? How can we integrate that in trying to attract hard-to-reach community members and so on? Think about the layout and the safety, and also think about then the existing children's services at the library. And there may be other relevant information that we haven't thought about, because you are the ones who know your communities the best. Okay, and I think we're getting to Jane's part.
Okay, I'll just say a few little points about the 4th section and how we are thinking you may be able to use this in your framework, and you're using the template that we've suggested. First of all, before we look at the templates themselves, just a couple of points to keep in mind. First of all, just in general, to keep in mind the big picture goals, but in the template we're sort of honing down into the actual 30-minute experience and really being clear of why you might be doing it, what you want to achieve from it. So it's really a tool for thinking through and creating cohesion. Now, the way we did this, we have the 6 tables in the framework that correspond with those 6 emergent literacy areas and domains. So we've got the phonological awareness, alphabet and letter knowledge, and concepts of print. They were the mainly decoding ones. And then we've got oral language and vocabulary, background knowledge, and print motivation. So they were on the other side, the mainly comprehending ones. And also we've organised the framework and the tables according to age of child, because we felt that these corresponded to the majority of storytime sessions that libraries are using. So I know not every library has babies or babies and toddlers separately, and then the 3 to 5 year olds. So, but we wanted to just try and think about and unpack what might belong and might be able to promote these particular emergent literacy knowledge and skills for, and what that would mean for children of different ages. So you'll find when you have a closer look at it that many of the teaching strategies are similar across the age ranges, and some are general and relevant to all situations. For example, to model and demonstrate enthusiasm for books and reading, that would apply to any age group. Secondly, another thing to just mention before we look more closely, the framework's been designed to work specifically for use in libraries where the size and the composition of the literacy sessions may well be unknown in advance. So for this reason, it hasn't been possible to provide really detailed learning objectives and teacher-educator type strategies, teaching strategies for the adult-child interactions around books. The term strategies that we've used refers both to the specific approaches and the broad practices that you might employ to help children achieve the different language and literacy learning objectives. So these tables, as you see, our central to our thinking, as Emilia has explained, and Marie also, is that we want to start with where children are. We start with the child, what the child can do, and what the child knows, understands, and so forth. So based on our understanding of children's language and literacy development. Now, if you know children, of course, you learn more and more about this all along, and it helps you hone and target the experiences you want to provide for them. We can't do that so well in a library for the reasons we've talked about. So just to keep in mind that these are general suggestions only. It's entirely up to you what kind of what you want the children to achieve and how you want to go about achieving it. These are suggestions of ways you might do it. So for developing print motivation, for example, birth to 12 months, for the baby to enjoy looking at pictures and vocalising, to engage with caregivers by moving to the rhythm of songs and rhymes. So across the top row are what you might like to achieve, for the children to achieve, and then how do you work towards that with specific strategies for your sessions. So they're our tables and frameworks, and you'll find those in the framework book in section 4. But I'd also like to mention just in passing that in the literature review, we've also provided some tables of children's language development. And we've done it in a similar way, so that if you would like to refresh your memories on, what can we expect from babies and toddlers prior to 12 months in terms of their language and literacy or their language development, and how educators can promote that language development. We've got these tables going from birth up to 5 years of age. And again, starting with the child, how the child communicates and how the educator can support this development. So that goes something that's referenced there in the literature review. Okay, so now let's narrow right down into the here we go. So here we have our proposed planning template for the for your literacy sessions. So I just want to mention a few things about filling in this template, and I'm imagining it's going to be a new approach, possibly for some of you, in terms of planning your sessions. So you'll see there right in the centre are the objectives for children's learning, starting with children again, and then the strategies you're going to employ to support children's learning. So those objectives might be, for example, with babies, that you want them to enjoy listening to the literary language of songs and rhymes. And you might also want them to share, look at a picture book with their mother and manipulate and explore. And I've got an example template that we've started to fill in, just which I'll show in a minute, just to, you know, provide a bit of an example. As I said before, this template, we're seeing it more as a tool for thinking through and creating cohesion within your whole session. And some of the libraries people who've already talked to you have explained some of the ways that they do that as well, particularly well. Need to adapt this to your particular community of parents and carers and children, and practice, as we've also said, to practice reading aloud any of the books that you are planning to use, and then use that as a way of filling that in. So there's cross-referencing. So objectives for children's learning, you can turn, if you wish, to the frameworks we've provided. Page 17. So say you're thinking, okay, what objectives do I want the children to learn from this session? You can turn to these tables and think, okay, here's some suggestions of possible objectives I might want to consider. And then for the strategies to support children's learning, here are some suggestions of strategies that might be able to promote that learning in the children. And then, of course, there's the notes specific to my community, because as we've seen, again, there are so many different communities with all different kinds of composition, and to take those into account so that the experiences can be most effective. Okay. We now have, I think, so we've also included this evaluation section and the support ideas for younger children and extension ideas for older children. So in a sense, it's a good idea if you can just jot down your thoughts and reflections on the experience as soon as you possibly can after doing it, when it's fresher in your mind, and you can think about what you would like to, what went well, what you would consider changing next. Perhaps try something different next time. Now this is a little, a kind of a draft of filling in our template for a imagined session for children under 12 months of age. So if I was doing this, my objectives might be, I might have 3 objectives: to respond physically to the pattern language of nursery for the baby to do this, to explore, manipulate and look at the pictures of familiar objects in board books, and to listen to the parent carer label objects in the pictures. And the strategies to support that learning. Okay, yes, model how, for the parents mainly, how to use voice and gestures to engage a baby's attention. I'll repeat the rhymes at least twice, and I'll ask the parents to choose a book to read with their child and label the pictures. So those two relate to each other in that way. And then what literacy tips are you going to give the parents or carers as your during the session itself? And here to have some points, just list what books, props, resources and equipment you're going to use. Think about what nursery rhymes you want to use. Here, if we want to encourage participation of the baby, the parent carer will be asked to sit facing the baby, with the baby sitting, or if too young to sit, lying down. And the nursery rhymes, here are 3, that all involve physical interaction with the child. So you're getting the physicality, the beat of the nursery rhyme, the exchange, and encouraging the child. So in a way, you're working with the baby through the parent or carer with this age group of children. It's always good to have a plan B, and here are some questions to think about too. So just to think, well, what will we do if the baby's carer or parent brings an older child? How will you extend for them during the session? So here's just a few thoughts. You might suggest older children join in rhymes. Provide a basket of nursery rhyme anthologies so they can extend their interest by looking at finding familiar rhymes that they already know about and looking at how they've been illustrated by different illustrators. Creating that bridge between oral and written texts. And then, okay, to evaluate, to think about, well, what were my objectives for children's learning? How can I evaluate that? How did that work? Did I see evidence that these things were happening? Did babies respond physically to the rhythm and pattern of the literary language with their mothers? And in terms of my strategies, well, is there any, what tells me whether my strategies were effective or not? Did the parents, carers, keep looking at me and not look at their baby when interacting? Okay, need to think that one through, maybe provide more explanations and so on. So I think that's more to... Oh, yeah. Okay, this has already been mentioned in different ways throughout, so I'll just do this, go quite quickly through these slides. So, early literacy session, there are 3 aspects to it: the planning, the actual presentation, and the reflection afterwards. And then the reading aloud component of the session. Again, the preparation, how are you going to manage before, during and after the actual reading of the book itself. So we've discussed some of these already to decide on the objectives for your literacy learning and but also, to look a bit more closely at it. So how exactly are you going to energise the group or settle the group or refocus the children's attention when necessary? Okay, in the actual presentation of the early literacy session, Again, just to reiterate that everyone needs to be able to see and hear you without straining. And to introduce yourself and explain how you expect the children and the caregivers to participate in the experience, because they won't necessarily know unless you tell them exactly what you're wanting them to do. And you may need to keep reminding the children of those expectations when necessary to help maintain your group cohesion. Very young children may need to be reminded several times in a single session, you know, that I want you to put your listening ears on and look at me when I'm reading your story and look at the pictures, that sort of thing, with older children. But if you don't want that, that's fine too. But make clear what you want from the children and the parents as well. If a child goes off topic and talks at length, as we talked about this too, that's interesting, but let's finish our story now and you can tell me at the end. And to try and make sure you are there at the end, because they will probably come and want to tell you the story, and it's building trust. Yeah, at least every 10 minutes to change the pace and to be available before and after. So what worked well afterwards, and again, when we looked at the template, we saw this. How suitable was the book and other activities? Because it's so unpredictable sometimes. You might know, love a book and it might have worked really well and so on, but maybe for another time and another group and another season, it just might not work so well at all. So to try and be watching and reflecting as well as presenting at the same time. So when you've selected your books, to think about how you're going to introduce it. What background knowledge would a child need to understand this book and learn a little something new from this book? Because that idea of the zone of proximal development, what a child can know and understand by themselves, and what with your assistance they can do together and learn from that part of it. So what words are you going to emphasise and how? And what parts of the illustration are you going to draw attention to? So say, coming back to that snail trail book, you might want to ask children, well, something like, where do you think the snail was going? Or to go back and look at where the trail went, and back and forth across the pictures. And also, as part of the preparation, to practice reading the books out loud with expression and holding them so the children can see, even if the child's up the back and there are parents sitting there. I really think it's worth taking the time, however long it takes, to get everyone settled and in a position where they're ready to learn. So reading aloud, yes, that was beautifully demonstrated by the library staff who spoke to us before, you know, to generate the excitement, to look at the cover and read the title and the names of the author and illustrator, pointing to the words as you read, even if these children are very young, and explain what the author and illustrator do. And then invite the children to guess what the book's going to be about. So you starting to develop their prediction skills, because so much of understanding what a story's about is previous experience and then predicting ahead of time. So you sort of know, okay, somewhere along the track there's going to be this, there'll be a problem. And then at the end I know there's going to be a resolution. And as I said, it's often the child goes to bed. So in the book, and to clarify words or objects on the cover, because children will scrutinise the cover and they'll take clues from that. And a lot of covers, aren't actually very clear about what the book is about, that's good. You can talk about that. And reading the book, pace yourself. Don't rush, especially with very young children, and even if it's getting a bit unsettled. The gestures, the voice, the emotions that you convey will have them spellbound with the over-exaggeration, as we heard about before. And try and make eye contact with the children, and monitor their attention and engagement. And with the questions, it might be worth just having some in your head that can just pop out that aren't going to be open-ended questions, just so that you'll be focusing on a lot of different things. Well, you are. You know all this anyway, you've had the experience of it. But a few carefully planned questions so that no matter how it's going, you've got some things to engage. Reading aloud expressively, so to project your voice, articulate clearly, and read slowly, especially with the younger ones. And especially if children are just learning language or just learning English language, to really use the gestures and the facial expressions and the emotions to convey meaning non-verbally, and work hard towards getting shared meaning with the children. And engage in those ways of pausing, using different voices. And after you've finished reading the book, talk a little bit about the characters and events. And I don't mean ask them to retell the story or anything like that, but just simple things like, what was your favourite part of the book? You might consider finishing up with an open question for children to take away with them and think about later. So it might be, how do you think you'd feel if you went on a magic carpet ride, or whatever it might be related to the topic. If they're disengaged, I would stop what we're doing, take a bit of time to get everyone back together again, and then go on with the story or the book. Okay, so just to reiterate about questioning, which is such an important pedagogical strategy, and just to think it through. The library situation is unique in itself, and some of what we read about questioning really can't be applied to the library context very well. Finally, just keep in mind the overall goals and objectives, and it's unlikely that anyone can maintain the engagement of all the children all of the time, but just as long as you engage each child some of the time, you've done a wonderful job, and I think it certainly will have enriched those children and caregivers' lives. So thank you. Sorry if that was too disjointed.
I promised I'd come back to the elephant in the room. Craft. It was from the very beginning that these concerns about craft and whether we should just keep doing it because we've always been doing it, whether that's justified given that it is something that takes a lot of resources, a lot of time to prepare, can be quite costly and so on. And people were saying, and there are limited, they couldn't sort of easily find evidence. We need to have evidence that craft supports early language and literacy development. Okay, there aren't many studies that look at craft in relation to early language and literacy. Those that we could find have been discussed in the literature review. So please, if you're interested in that topic, go and have a look at that. But I thought it was important to see what reasons there might be to continue doing craft. And this is both in terms of engagement and in terms of supporting early language and literacy, which is the focus of the work we've been doing. Okay, that was in Wollondilly. We went, I can't remember what month we went there. I think it may have been April or May. Anyway, in Wollondilly, for Valentine's Day, they had asked children to tell their caregivers and write on those pieces of paper, I love story time because. And on each one of them, craft featured in some way. Because I like craft, reading books, sitting on a mat, having a turn game with other kids, and I like my teacher. I like to use my library card to borrow books, DVDs, which I like. Okay? We focused a lot on books, but that's not to say that, libraries don't have other valuable resources to offer. I get to hear stories, sing, play games, do craft, and hang out with grandma. I should be pointing that way. I like craft, singing, and seeing all of my library friends. I also love all the books I can borrow. I love story time because, after all, the reading, singing, and craft, we always get a stamp. I love the stamp. I really like it. Glue and scissors, art and craft. All right. So this was, we tried, even though that wasn't sort of possible within the project to do in a much more formal way, but we tried to also listen to, and that was helpful, especially when I had Marie come with me or Natalie Papaelinas come with me to some of these sessions that I recorded. It was great to have another person who could kind of, observe a bit more than I was able to. I was fiddling with the camera and, and trying to capture the best view of the presenters and try and sort of like only capture children from the back, which of course doesn't work. But anyway, so we tried to capture children's perspectives as well, even though children were not formally a research participant in that project, in the research project. Okay, so these are children perspectives. But in interviews with presenters, again, craft was, as I said, the elephant in the room. So people talked about it as being resource intensive and sometimes overshadowing literacy proper, yet valued by storytime participants. Valuable for fine motor skills is something that we used to get recognized by a lot of in the interviews by a lot of the presenters. And it provided, and this is what I like, provided opportunity for interactions that connect children and families to books, stories, and to the library. Okay, so these are just from the interview, some of the excerpts. It can be a very expensive event in all the paper, the glue, the crayons, but carers are grateful because they don't have to do time craft at home, and this is their only place that they can actually do it. And as a parent, I'd much rather not have to do it at home. The craft is all about getting those little fingers ready for writing. It's a great learning time to be helping the parents to teach children how to use scissors. And then there were associated concerns that often it was actually the parents and the grandparents using the scissors and doing the craft and thoroughly enjoying the experience and doing beautiful artwork, but, were we doing what we were hoping to achieve? But the things that I particularly really liked, partly because coming from a background as someone who's, initially my background is in linguistics and I love thinking about language and the connection between language and literacy, were these ones. It reinforces the message of one of the books, and finished craft can be a reminder of being at the library, and this is what we did. And children can take their craft home and they can retell that story. Okay. Now, if we think about our domains, we can think about, are we creating craft experiences in ways that encourage oral language and vocabulary development, as well as the fine motor skills? Okay. So the framework gives you tools to argue for why craft is important, but also hopefully tools to think about how can I design craft to really encourage, promote that development of oral language and literacy skills. One of the things that can be done really well is it can expose children to the language of instructions. We have to be careful there. Keep them short, keep them brief, Emphasize only the important elements. Don't make it too complex. In this case, in Wollondilly, we had silly stuff was the theme of the library session, and they made the green sheep. They had a paper bag, like one of your sandwich brown paper bags. They had some crumpled paper and this sheep face. I don't know how long it took to prepare, but that was valuable because she explained, oh, this is the material, this is the model, and just make sure that it's pointing up so that you can put your hand in because it's going to be a puppet. Okay? But one of my favorite examples is this one from Parks. In this one, the session was, had a couple of books. One of them was What's in My Lunchbox, and by Peter Carnavas. And what they then did, and it's kind of interesting to think as well about some of your other session objectives, which may be preparing children for school. In this case, they were talking about, so if you have to go to school, what would you take in your lunchbox? Okay? But one of the important, when we talk about school readiness, often we miss the importance of, and I don't particularly like the term school readiness, the importance of language in all of this. Do children have the language skills to manage the school context? Are we giving them that opportunity to not just talk with their family and friends at home, people who know them well, people who share the same experiences, but be able to tell someone else what they've experienced? Okay, so in this case, the craft was very simple, an outline of that lunchbox on an A3 piece of paper, and discontinued magazines that were going to be chucked out anyway, scissors and glue. And they were encouraged to really sit down with their caregivers and talk about what they'd like to cut out of those magazines and stick in their lunchbox. There was no sort of right or wrong way of doing it. It wasn't about being beautiful, but it was about talking and discussing and thinking about why would you like to take a car in your lunchbox or a dinosaur, or why do you put an eggplant just like that in your lunchbox? Apparently one child said that he loves doing it, you know, and he loves eggplants so much, he loves them straight from the tree. Okay, all right, but what I found even more interesting, can you notice that open-endedness of that activity? Can you notice that child is using the scissors by himself? Okay, because it doesn't actually encourage anyone to aim for perfection of the actual thing that they've produced. But what they then also did, which was a tradition that they had developed because of a different reason. They had someone who had been unemployed for a very long time and suffering from depression, I suppose, and that guy was often at the library computers looking for a job and so on. And so they wanted to kind of encourage children to interact with him and make him feel, you know, just cheer him up, I suppose. But then that person found a job, so it's all good. And then what they started doing was encourage children to go and show their craft to the people or the person at the desk. Okay. Now that can do wonders perhaps for recognition of what you're doing and how much children are enjoying it, and why craft is important in this sort of very community-oriented, engagement-oriented way. But it's also very valuable for language, the language experience it provides, to tell someone else, not your mum and dad with whom you've just designed that beautiful lunchbox with your eggplant and all of that, but also to someone else. Because then you have to use language that is much more explicit, that is much more decontextualized, not dependent on the immediate context. Yes, you can maybe still point to the pictures, but you can explain to them about, you know, experiences you've shared with your mum and dad, but you haven't necessarily shared with them, and so they don't know you. So there are other wonderful examples, but these are two that I kind of thought have stuck out. So I'd like to just finish off by just highlighting how much more work can be done. And before I start though, I just wanted to say something that I shared with Miley. I hope it's okay. Maria and I recently presented at the Institute of Education at University College London, because it's my study leave from university at the time, so I have been able to go and work with colleagues overseas. We gave a presentation on the use of props in library story time, something that we've been working on lately, which hasn't been sort of fully incorporated in the framework just because there's so much more to be done and thought about and so on. And people came to me afterwards, and I think there were also some comments on Twitter, and they were saying, well, actually, you know, these are people who come from education, some of them from early childhood education, some of them have been early childhood educators, teachers themselves, and said there's so much that we can actually learn from these library presenters about, you know, integrating props, engaging children, and all of these things. So often you might be engaging in really effective practices, and you kind of have the feeling that, oh, that seems to be working, people seem to be engaged. So we hope the framework has provided you with some tools to, sort of be able to articulate why this seems to be working. But yeah, just mentioning future directions. Okay, so we personally are sort of just diving into that now, even though for you it might seem like the conclusion of the project, but this is something that we are still exploring from a very much more multimodal perspective in some ways, how picture books and other props can be integrated most effectively. So how do we use gestures pointing to certain parts of picture books and not others, and so on? When do we bring in a puppet? When do we take it out? Children's perspectives. There is room for more work on that, integrating children's perspectives themselves, and also children's participation as research participants, but also as co-designers of early literacy sessions. I think that's something that we can all learn from. Diversity, we have tried as best as we can to cover that in the literature review, but there's so much that can be done in terms of thinking about Indigenous perspectives, multicultural perspectives, multilingual perspectives. We haven't looked at sessions in languages other than English, or multicultural story time, which is the session that Lee mentioned that they have at Blacktown. We looked at the regular kind of sessions. Intergenerational perspectives, very important. Inclusion of children with diverse abilities. This is something that a lot of libraries are doing. They might have special sessions. We haven't looked at those, and there's much more work and thinking to be done. Our project didn't, in the literature review, yes, but in the framework itself, as we said, we have focused on early literacy sessions, but there is a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of outreach, and it's great that we've got Rachel Browning to talk to us about First Five Forever, but also the other projects that I mentioned earlier. A lot of them have done more in that direction in terms of outreach. So seeing how these projects can all come together. Drama, play, and other areas of learning. I know there are libraries that offer STEAM sessions, going beyond print-based literacy. In the sessions that we observed, only one, I think, in Penrith used PowerPoint, but there wasn't much use of technology for very good reasons, we believe. But anyway, we know libraries do a lot more. And beyond the first five, how do we build on what we've done for those children birth to five later on, and how do we build connections? One of the things we noticed that Maitland, that was interesting, is that during the school holidays, they had themes that allowed younger children and older children to all participate in the theme. Of course, that makes it more challenging for the presenter. So they had the theme of heroes, and so they had a session on firefighters and so on. But they were saying that this was important because it allowed them to integrate those children who were on school holidays as well as their regular participants in story time. And I think that should be my last one. I'd like to finish with a thank you. I don't know if I should take questions for 5 minutes or let people sort of, I don't know whether people need to flex themselves a bit. Yeah, I wish we had more time because I'm sure that there are so many questions, and maybe, yeah, at the end, Miley will sort of suggest some ideas for how we may still be able to get questions afterwards. Yeah. Any burning questions at the moment? No? Okay. Great. I hope we haven't overwhelmed you. I'm sorry it's been mainly us talking, but.
Okay, so we have a presentation now from north of the border, because we're really excited to have the opportunity to find out how in Queensland they've actually been able to demonstrate the impact of their early literacy programming. Now, that's not something that was within the scope of our research project, so we're particularly thrilled to welcome Rachel Browning. Rachel's the lead of the First Five Forever program at the State Library of Queensland.
Thank you, Miley. If anyone needs to stand up and stretch for a minute, please do, because I'm not going to fill 35 minutes, okay? Give me a minute to set up. I'm not going to do a nursery rhyme. Heads and shoulders, maybe. I'll be straight back to Twinkle Twinkle in a minute. Okay, we might need to sit down and come back together now. Don't want to go over time. But it is nice just to have that opportunity for a minute. So as Miley explained, I'm Rachel Browning from State Library of Queensland, and I'm really looking forward to working with State Library of New South Wales. What you've achieved with the framework is absolutely amazing. We've been watching along the way and really keen to see it all come out. It looks absolutely incredible. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and the elders that came before me. And I know I don't need to convince you, I don't need to tell you all about early literacy. We're all in the same room here, and that's really lovely. I don't usually speak to people who work in libraries. I speak to other people and I would spend so much time telling them about libraries. But I'm here to talk to you about the Libraries as Creative Spaces framework. So this is an evaluation framework. I'll tell you right now, I wasn't part of the development of this. It was developed by QUT Digital Media Research Centre. I have been with this project for 2 years, and in that time we've actually had that framework, or First Five Forever, mapped against that framework, and that's what I'm here to tell you about today. So what we're trying to do is shift from a collection of outputs or a demonstration of outputs and shift to impacts. We had a lot of qualitative data and a lot of quantitative data, but we weren't selling our story. And in the last 2 years, we've been on a mission to get ongoing funding for First Five Forever, so we've been all about advocacy for public libraries. So in 2014 is when State Library of Queensland first started working with QUT, and they commissioned the Digital Media Research Centre to investigate the impact of creative spaces and activities in public libraries, provide clear evidence of this impact, and articulate opportunities for further embedding creative spaces in public libraries. This also included community spaces, so outreach as we'd know it. What we needed was the tools and the templates that public libraries could use themselves to advocate internally with local council. And the research from QUT indicated libraries have been evaluated for more than 100 years, but only recently have there been concerted efforts to develop frameworks that can qualitatively assess the social impacts on individuals and their communities. You know, people come up to you and they'll say, "Oh, I love libraries. Oh, you must have the best job in the world." And you say, "Oh, do you use your library?" "Oh, no, I just have this feeling." It's like, yeah, great, that doesn't get us funded. So the impact of libraries as creative spaces framework included a contextual review of what creativity, space and place means in a library context. A literature review was done on the evaluation of creative activity in libraries, analysis of close to 6,000 library organised activities, interviews and observational field research across 5 selected sites. And the result was this evidence-based creative spaces impact framework, which includes a user guide and templates. And I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to take you through all of the slides because all of this is available online. I didn't print a copy for everyone because I just feel like go back and work out what's useful for you. I'll show you some screenshots, but it's all available on our website. I didn't put a link in because, as timing would have it, State Library of Queensland's just about to relaunch a website. So any link I put in here was going to be out of date by tomorrow. It's all licensed under Creative Commons too, and totally adaptable. So this is what the framework basically looks like. It has the 8 different domains, and then under each domain we have impact indicators. So the benefits of participating in library activities can be grey area. Perhaps councils know that libraries are good things, but they don't quite know why. They don't have the words to describe them. And when we have words to describe them, sometimes they're not sort of in a language that council will relate to. So we needed to adopt a stronger, articulate language that could also act as an advocacy tool. You know how notoriously difficult it is to measure impact, and that's why this isn't something that's done lightly. So the reason the Creative Spaces Impact Framework was developed through the research stresses the importance of the qualitative data. So looking at the categories, number 1, provide access to resources. So in a library sense, this is the collections, but also craft supplies, historical records, digital content. Number 2, helps to build ideas, is exposing the public to new ideas and facilitating the development of curiosity. Now, these are all broader than early literacy, but we will take you through an example of how it was applied to an early literacy session. Number 3, connects people to civic engagement, supports the development of community, aids cultural participation, supports health and wellbeing. So these are all things that are on council agendas and state government. Provides for educational attainment and encourages economic productivity. You might think, do we really rate there? But we really do in early literacy. So the 8 criteria, I'm having trouble clicking and reading. The 8 criteria all have an explanation underneath them, and then they have the specific impact indicators. And then these are all available on a template that you can download. So looking at number 4, community development, it has the description at the top and then the impact indicators. They're things like community ownership, strength and identity, cultural diversity and inclusiveness, social capital, social interaction and socialising, localised service provision, which is a lot about our community needs analysis that you had the template up for, cooperation, collaboration, sharing, trust, self-organisation and resilience. This is a visual of the full set of the 8 domains with all of the criteria underneath, and I won't take you through them all, they're online. But by using a template such as this, it establishes right from the start how you can set up to do qualitative evaluation. So in the planning stages, the activity organiser would complete the aim column on the form saying, is this one of the aimed, is this one of the outcomes of this, is that an aim of this session? Because sometimes what we're finding is it might not have been an intended outcome or an aim, but we did have a result in that domain. So that's a lovely unexpected outcome. And then during or following the activity, the organiser can rate the impact of each of the criteria. And then once you've done that, you end up with this pie chart, colourful pie chart, and then the values for the chart at the top. And then that can show you whether you've had, small impact, very strong impact in each of these areas. That's all on an Excel spreadsheet that you can download. So, an example of something that you're very familiar with. A baby rhyme time session. It's held upstairs at one of the libraries on the Gold Coast. There was 60 people there that day. It was led by 2 library staff. There was cushions on the floor, talking about bound space. That was all happening. And then they did use an overhead projector for the words, just to be able to ensure that everyone could see the words. Babies ranged in age from a few months through to approximately 12 months, and there were some older siblings roaming around and participating at times. Majority of the adults were grandparents and carers, and after the session, some researchers interviewed some of the parents there. So it's a familiar session. I know you can picture that easily. 8 adult participants spoke with the researchers about their views on the benefits of the program, and the researchers spoke them through the Creative Spaces framework. Some of the key benefits were around socialising and community development and developing skills to use at home. A really big part of First Five Forever is about the translation to the home environment, so we use that. We're very strong on the parent messaging at sessions. And so when this is applied under the framework, this is what the outcomes look like. So then that's something that can be used as an advocacy tool with council or with library management about the importance, the broader societal impact of such a session. This was one individual session. So you can see under accessing resources, it was about providing parents and guardians with access to a range of songs and rhymes led by staff who have experience in childhood development. It's about learning under ideas building. It's about learning the songs and rhymes during the session and receiving advice on how to engage and communicate with your child at home. Under civic engagement, it supports a sense of trust in the library and in local government. Community development allows parents and guardians to come together and socialise. Cultural participation, it was a music-orientated activity. Health and well-being, it's about getting out of the house with a young child and improving motor skills for babies, toddlers and children through a fun activity. The educational attainment was the contribution to early literacy development. And the economic productivity was noted as sharing information among parents. They were talking about things like products to buy. Which nappies are you using? Where do you go? Which park do you like best? Things like that. Which we sort of know as one of those really good add-ons with libraries, but we don't communicate it in any advocacy way, usually. Now to connect this to First Five Forever. For the first 2 years of this program, First Five Forever started in 2015 as a 4-year project, and for the first 2 years, State Library commissioned a group called MHM to undertake annual evaluation. So we had 2015 was the blue report, 2016 was the green report. They're both published in 2017. That's because we ran the project as a calendar year project, so that by the time we had our data in and then it was analysed and came back. So we did a lot of publishing last year. So that was based on the quantitative data that was submitted by libraries individually, feedback from libraries and parents. We did a postcard system for consent for MHM to contact families after the sessions to provide feedback. And we also included surveys at all of our professional development sessions, so that's covering library staff across Queensland. Each evaluation report was over 60 pages long. They included great feedback and great numbers, but they weren't being read. It's really tricky. You have this great information, but it was just too long in that format for us at that time. We were measuring against key KPIs. You can see there, number of participants in library activities, participants at outreach activities. We did distribute toolkits, particularly in the first 2 years. We've sort of adapted that model because we realised that a lot of communities have specific community need that isn't met by a one single toolkit approach. Some libraries prefer to use black and white board books and go into hospitals and connect people to join their baby up, as soon as they're out of hospital, whereas other people only want to give them to the 3 to 5-year-olds when it's a different book, like Dirty Dinosaur. So we measured things like media reach with our social media, number of councils participating in professional development. So you can see we were collecting all of this data, and it's really important that we do, but it's what we do with it and how we presented it. We'd have these big sheets, at a glance, and we'd tally up the data, and the figures looked great. We could walk around saying, close to 2 million attendances at early literacy sessions in 3 years, things like that, but it didn't really mean anything. People would say, well, how does that compare to another program? Or is that better than it was in 2014? So we really needed something to tell the data story. So in 2017, we put together a summary report on the data that we had so far, but we realised we still needed something to be able to share the qualitative story. Libraries were great at submitting stories and case studies, but we didn't have a form or a framework to be using them. So we went back to QUT, to the Digital Media Research Centre, and we commissioned them to do a report on how First Five Forever had a broader societal impact than just only early literacy sessions. So again, they drew on a contextual review around early literacy. They looked at existing First Five Forever data and evaluations, and they did interviews with state library staff as well as public library network staff. So the First Five Forever initiative was evaluated in terms of the 8 primary criteria of the original framework. I'd like to acknowledge the research team of Professor Jean Burgess, Dr Kerry Houghton and Michael Duzani. They were the ones that actually came up with this report. I did bring a copy, but again, all of these reports are available online on the State Library website. So this enabled us to consider impact beyond individual children and families and to identify wider community benefits and connections which may in turn further benefit children and families. The report came back. First Five Forever exemplifies the kind of creative and innovative programming that the framework was designed to capture, where the impacts go well beyond common public perceptions about the purpose of libraries. It's really about us sharing our story more broadly. The results were clear, with strong to very strong impact across the 8 criteria. So even though we probably went in with the perception of not contributing to economic productivity, it came back still as strong. The findings were clear. Public libraries provide an ideal setting to support, facilitate and lead early literacy development programs. While primarily built around promoting and improving early literacy, First Five Forever Initiatives is also a community facilitator and connector. So that's linking into the earlier report around active connectors, which I know you reference in the framework. Supporting families and children through a culture of participation and lifelong learning. Now, just to very quickly go through an example in the QUT report that was done against First Five Forever. In number 1, accessing resources. So First Five Forever initiative does provide access to library and other resources for families, but the specific case study they looked at was on the Sunshine Coast, where they do craft sessions. But the craft sessions are open-ended, child-led craft, and what they wanted to do was just address the sense around some of the communities that the families didn't want to walk in and have a heavily resourced session because they felt it wasn't something they could do at home. So what they did was had a commitment to using resources that would be readily available. So you're using the colander and a wooden spoon. You're using the empty tissue box. There was not a great deal of purchasing to resource craft sessions. And all of the case studies are in the report in full. And they all still link to the parent message around encouraging language development, letter recognition and other early literacy skills. The next one was under ideas building, so number 2. First Five Forever really supported, particularly in the last 2 years, we've really tried to drive that local innovation. What works for your community and why? We encourage libraries to look at their AEDC data and really hone in on what the need of their community is, which really gets a lot of libraries thinking about how to do outreach differently. In Logan, there was these 2 musicians called Mad Mike and Junior, and they were regular library users and musicians in sessions, but they actually came up with their own song, which is all about First Five Forever and the importance of early literacy. But it's sort of done as a rap, believe it or not, and it's sort of aimed at parents to say, hey, you can do this, you've got this, and you need to be there for your kids. And it's just being really warmly embraced and shared an incredible number of times on social media. So that's something that could then get recorded under a benefit of ideas. And they're now touring South East Queensland libraries. They've got gigs everywhere. So number 3, under civic engagement. So this is about incorporating institutional trust and connection to community. It's not really specifically an aim of First Five Forever, but we do feel that through a lot of the outreach we are achieving this. An example is at that, and that's on purpose. They're meant to look like that. It wasn't just a Queensland flood. This was in Logan, which is south of Brisbane. They have mud play days where they encourage the whole family to come along, and they set up tents, and they have all of these activities which are about early literacy strategies, but it's actually about the whole family coming and being together and playing. One of the feedback following one of those was from the First Five Forever coordinator at the library is families now know that council's beyond rates, beyond animal management. It's able to showcase at Logan City Council what it is and what it stands for. I get the feeling she's going to think about her community and the council differently. That's a very meaningful impact for a community in Logan. The outreach program has played a significant role in community development across the state. The flexibility of the initiative allows programs to be tailored to meet specific community needs. In Brisbane City Council, they've developed a children's acknowledgement to country, and that's done before every early literacy session. It's very simple and it's very quick and it's effective. We had our early literacy forum at State Library 2 weeks ago, and we all did this as adults too. But it's thinking next year is United Nations International Year of Indigenous Languages. I know State Library of Queensland's very focused on ensuring that we really connect with communities and develop resources that reflect the Queensland story in first language. So the framework in action. Can I use it to identify and generate creative activity if you feel you may be not meeting one of the areas in the 8 criteria? Identify objectives and outcomes for creative activity, or align creative activity with community need. Monitor trends and use it for strategic planning, and also there's templates for to guide exit surveys in the report as well. So that's what the framework looks like, just the cover online with the user guide. And then this is an example of what one of the templates looks like that you can download. You can put your aims in and what the outcomes are. You can do it to compare activities, you know, like should I be doing the babies? Should I be doing craft with the 3 to 5s? You can put them all in as a comparison, or you can do a single activity valuation. And advocate. Oh. Oops. So this was just, you know, once you've got a clear idea and you've got these reports, who do we talk to? Do you make sure that your local member is a member or has a library membership card? Louise Danoon and I went to the Local Government Association conference last year, and let me tell you, she's key at not letting a single person get past that stall. And we got them all to describe what the best library in Queensland would look like. And then we sent that, and we took a photo with them with their words up in a frame, very, you know, appealing to that Queenslander sense. And then we took a photo, and then we used that as a Christmas card to each council, saying, this is what you believe the best library in Queensland looks like. Are you meeting this? Is this what you're delivering? I don't know what we're doing this year. But it is just about identifying local champions and making sure that you've got the data on hand. At the forum we had 2 weeks ago, one of the people from Western Downs Council spoke about having your data stories ready at all times. And it might be the 2-minute data story that you have to tell when you run into someone, you go up in the lift with them. It might be the story that you need to have on hand for when there's a journalist coming by. But it is a way of always weaving in what the library's achieving to those moments. That's it. If anyone has any questions.
Are there any questions out there? Things that people would like to ask? Yes, I'll just pass the microphone. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Help me.
Just the how, Rachel. So you've actually found the quality of data by surveys, face-to-face talking to people?
Yeah, so at State Library we ask for annual report each year from each council or for each library service. That includes fairly standard quantitative data, and then the qualitative data. We don't even have that much of a framework around it, but they send in all of their media, they send in feedback from families, observations. Often it's the stuff that they've recorded off the session plans as well, and then they sort of do a summary report of that. What have they changed in the last 12 months in their practice? But yeah, I think it's also the visuals. Make sure you've always got good photos, which are really hard to get with consent and children, and often, it's not always the parent there, and the grandparent might be reluctant to sign something.
Any more questions? This is a fairly unique opportunity. Yes, we've got one up the back. Sure.
Okay, so this will all be on the State Library of Queensland website. What I'll do is in probably a week or two, I'll send Miley the link to where it now lives. It's currently shifting house.
So
online.
The second part of the answer, make sure you're on the young people email list, and if you are, you'll definitely be getting it.
Yep. I should also say Miley and I are talking about professional development opportunities too. We run webinars every 2 months that we record. So when we run them live, we limit it to Queensland Public Libraries, and then we record them and make them freely available.
With the impact indicators that you were talking about, the 0 to 5 rating, is that something that the facilitator does from observation of the session?
I think that would be a decision made at the library service level. So it might be that you might do peer, so you might go and do it for somebody else's session, or there might be one specific person in the library that would do the rating. But when you're setting up as the activity organiser, I think is when you make those decisions.
And the report that you had commissioned by the digital centre, did they evaluate that in a different way, or did they use that collected data?
They used collected data and interviewed public library staff.
Great, thanks.
Do we have some more questions? No? Is everyone... Oh, yes, we do.
So the outcomes you had there were ones that councils might use. Do you find councils then manipulate those to reflect the individual council's strategies that they're reflecting?
So when it was originally done, the framework was originally developed for State Library of Queensland, so that was done by the QT, and then we've had them map first 5. We're now encouraging councils to do it at an individual level. So I haven't seen councils changing those at this stage. We wanted to have it at a statewide level as well, because the first one was an example at one specific library, and what we wanted to do was reflect what the initiative meant as a statewide initiative for advocacy purposes.
Well, another question, one moment.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that. I've used these templates before and they are very easy to use, so that's not my question. My question is that the impact evaluation is relatively new, and I guess we're still relying on our funders, so those numbers are still really important. So I'm just wondering, this has been around for a while now, have you seen an impact and a change of thinking above about how we look at our services, so it's not just focused on how many people we get through the door, that it is actually focused on impact?
Yeah, well, I think we have seen it in Queensland with the partnership between state government and local government. In this year's state budget, the Local Government Association actually had an advocacy plan around ensuring they advocated for future funding for First 5. So when we went to the LGAQ conference, a local government conference, it was the only motion passed that was unanimously supported, was First 5 Forever, and that was about us doing the advocacy, beforehand from public library level with local government, and then them saying, state government, don't stop this. This is having a really positive impact on Queensland children. I think what we're wanting to do is have something so that we don't wait for AEDC data. Louise and I presented at the AEDC conference last year, and I got the sense from many people that a lot of what we do, we're not going to see a change in the AED data. So don't sort of pin ourselves to things like that, because there's too much impact that we don't influence. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes, there is.
Because to me that's the way to really get to influence funding and ensure its consistency.
Yeah. I know a few years ago, Molly, you might remember which year, the library dividend report that was done. Was it? Yeah, 2012. I'm thinking it's before 2014, but I think that's the first time I'd seen that type of reporting done. I think it would be amazing if we could get to that point. Yes. Yeah. So we're just about to go out. I believe we're going out to tender very soon for research to be done on the 4-year project, and I'm hoping we could, talk to someone about what we could have as outcomes from that. So we've done the 2-year annual evaluations, but we want that 4-year evaluation to really guide us going forward.
All right. So was that the last question? You'll all have your questions on the train and the plane and everything on the way home.
My contact details are there, and I'm really happy to respond at any time. If it's not me, it'll be someone in the team.
So please join me in thanking Rachel for coming down to Sydney and joining us. So here we are. Everyone's been so patient, sat for so long on possibly the world's most uncomfortable chairs. But this project just wouldn't have been possible without the participation of all of the public library network across New South Wales. This is something that belongs to all of us and the team at Macquarie as well. So this is a really quite an exciting point for us, and a chance for us to actually work out what we do next. And a few things that occur to me is that at the individual library level, you've all got colleagues working in branches and people doing story time and in a variety of contexts who need to hear this message, need to be involved in developing their community analysis, looking at their sessions. There's also the opportunity for us collectively to be a really active learning community. Rather than reinvent the wheel, let's work together. So step 1 is making sure that you're on that email list, so that as we're able to look at creating some more collaborative online space where we can store information and ideas, where we can work together more effectively, if you're on that email list, you're going to get those messages. You'll be well informed. So that's my hot tip for people going back to the office. If you're not on the list, please join it, and make sure that the people who need to be on it in your organisation are on it. I think one of the things we're aware we need is to turn some of these great ideas and opportunities into training that's going to work for people and that's going to be sustainable, because there's going to be new people who have to do story time next year. There's going to be more staff and to be trained, hopefully forever, because it's so important that we'll never stop doing it. So we need to work out some sort of training model that's going to allow us to have champions in zones and regions across New South Wales who can act as perhaps train the trainer type opportunities. So these are all things that we'll work on together collectively over the next year or so to work out how we can do it, and also I guess look at some of those future research areas as well. So thank you all for coming along. I think we can have a little bit of an early mark, but please join me in thanking our researchers who have put so much work into this. And a particular thank you to Emilia, who, this has been too much of her life for the last 4 years.